Hello and welcome to Geetika Ki Canadian Diary. According to a survey by the Ontario Caregiver Organization, over the next 5 years, the number of caregivers in Ontario is expected to increase by more than 50% from 4 to 6.5 million. Joining me to discuss more about the need to support the caregivers in Ontario and what is out there in terms of resources available for people like you and me, I have James Janeiro, Director Policy and Government Relations from Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence. Thank you so much for joining me today, James.
Good morning, Geetika. Thanks for the time.
So, before we get deep into the National Caregiving Strategy, just for our listeners, can you please define who is a caregiver and who is a care provider?
Sure thing. So, in reality, in Canada today, 1/4 of all of us is a caregiver, and half of us will be a caregiver at some point in our lives. If you're a woman in Canada today in 2025, you're just as likely as not, about 50% likely to be a caregiver already today in 2025, before the realities of demographics catch up to us around the baby boom generation reaching those critical later, typically more care needing years later on in life. But in terms of a technical definition, let's say, a caregiver is pretty much anybody who provides care, unpaid care, to anybody else in their life. We take at CCC, Canadian Centre for Caregiving Excellence, we're a program of the Azrieli Foundation. We take a pretty expansive definition of this, right? So everything from a parent supporting a child with a disability to a sibling supporting another sibling with mental health or addictions challenges, or somebody supporting a parent or a neighbor or a loved one as they age or near the end of life into long-term care, palliative care, or the like. All of that to us, we would consider you, if you do any of that on an unpaid basis, to be a caregiver. The one part of the typical care economy we don't touch is neurotypical childcare. Sort of everything's fine, typical childcare, because we felt to the beginning of our organization that space is quite well served already. They didn't need our voice. The rest of that care economy desperately needed our voice, which is why we drew that box around that pretty broad definition. As for care providers, a care provider is somebody who provides care for a living. Like a personal support worker, they're called different things across Canada, but in Ontario, they're personal support workers, or PSWs, as you'll likely hear me refer to later on in our podcast today, but also direct support professionals who support people with disabilities to live in the community or to live in congregate care settings, disability aids, and so on and so forth. That's the difference for us. A caregiver is unpaid, a care provider is paid.
Thank you for that detailed explanation. I always hear people getting confused about that. So, the recent National Caregiving Strategy, it was released in February 2025.
Yep, just a
Let's
couple of
talk.
months ago.
Yeah, let's talk more in detail about that. What does it entail?
So this is it right here, our National Caregiving Strategy. Your listeners can find it online. If they just go to canadiancaregiving.org, you'll find us in all the detail about our work at CCCE, as well as specifically around the National Caregiving Strategy. As you say, we released it in February, but it was the product of really about a year's worth of a national co-design project where we convened caregivers, care providers, recipients of care from every part of this beautiful country, coast to coast to coast, online and in person, in various formats. Everything from large, massive, hundreds of people conferences where my colleagues and I would engage with the audience and take their views and make our pitch, all the way to meetings with one or two people, one-on-one, in person or online. Again, I want to emphasize, in every part of the country. It was done intentionally to try to reach the broad diversity of care in Canada. We are a large and beautiful country. There's a lot of Canada to cover and a lot of diversity to cover. And we felt that we really needed a proper co-design process so that the outcome of this would result in a situation where caregivers and care providers see themselves reflected in what we're saying. This was not James, the policy expert, telling you what you need to want as a caregiver, but rather we want to hear from you and put that on paper as a list of concrete, specific policy ideas for government to take up and start acting on right away. We didn't want this to end up being sort of dusty old report that lives on a shelf because it is so sort of highfalutin and multifaceted and so complex. Rather, we wanted a list of concrete, specific things that could be actioned as soon as they're received. I think we achieved that in large part because of the voices of caregivers and care providers and recipients of care, again, from all across the country. Also because we convened this incredible what we've called a care champions table of about 50 different people representing organizations across the wide diversity of care. Part of our work is trying to break down the silos between aging, disability, healthcare, and different other parts of mental health and addictions, other parts of the care space that often have been at loggerheads with each other. We've tried to break down those barriers and have this concrete, specific conversation around care in Canada and how we can do better. So the outcome of that is this big chunky policy document that we put out, as you say, in February. And I can go into this to get any level of detail you like, but why don't I start with the broad swaths, and then you can ask me any follow-ups you've got. I'll spare your listeners an hour policy lecture on this, so I'll give you the broad strokes, and then we can go deeper if you'd like. We broke down the strategy into 5 key components, and I'll just go through them one by one, starting with the idea of improving supports, programs, and services for caregivers. A lot of that has to do with financial supports and putting money in the pocket of caregivers. There are a couple of different ways to do that. There's a Canada Caregiver credit, which already exists today. And I encourage all of your listeners to go online, Google it, and find out some more about it, because fewer than 9% of caregivers access it today because they know so little about it. And unfortunately, it's also very hard to access. It's not transparent at all. And it's a non refundable credit, tax credit, rather than a refundable credit,
Can you
meaning that
repeat
it,
the name again? Sorry, James, interrupting you.
sure thing, it's the Canada Caregiver Credit.
Okay.
It has the effect of lowering your tax bill when you file your taxes rather than putting money in your pocket as a caregiver when you file your taxes. Now, I didn't know this when we started this work, but only about less than 20% of people in Canada actually owe taxes at the end of the year. The vast majority of us either have a null return of zero or get a little bit back over the course of the fiscal year. So these non-refundable credits that lower your tax bill don't really help the vast majority of us, and certainly don't help the vast majority of caregivers who themselves are likely earning less or living on a lower income than they would otherwise be because of their care responsibilities. More on that in just a second. But that first bucket, a lot of that has to do with cash in the pocket of caregivers. That credit is one example. There are others, like a caregiving benefit and others that I'm happy to talk about in detail. Second is around supporting caregivers in work and education. Caregivers have more than one thing they need to do at once, right? They work and they provide care, or they go to school to complete their education and provide care. Trying to do that balance today is very, very difficult. The workplace as it's constituted today in 2025 is not set up for the infinite complexity of human life today, where you're providing care to an aging parent or to a sibling with an intellectual disability, or even to a child as you're raising a child in school. So our suggestions here revolve around employment insurance and creating a sort of care leave modeled on parental leave that you get when you have a child in Canada, that sort of thing, where you're able to, yes, you fill out some paperwork, you present some evidence, and then you become entitled to what we're suggesting is 50 weeks of care leave over the course of the year that you're able to avail yourself of while making some or earning some money through EI, and also your job is protected, waiting for you at the end of that. This is not the be all and end all to solve every care situation. For example, if you are the parent of a child with a significant disability, 50 weeks off of work is not going to fix your problem for you. Nor will it fix the problem for you if you are working outside of the EI system, which far too many Canadians do today.
Yep.
But what this does do is create some flexibility so that, say, if you need to move your mom into long term care,
Mhm.
Or if your mom is in hospital and she's being discharged, but her permanent situation, say in rehab or in a retirement facility or long term care or the like, if that hasn't been sorted out yet and she's going to be staying with you for a little while and you need a few weeks to get that sorted, or something of that nature, moving a sibling into a group home, that sort of thing, this arrangement through EI would give you that kind of flexibility you need to take some time out of work to do what you need to do, but your job is waiting for you when you're done and you get back.
That is such an important information, James.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's our second bucket. Our third is around supporting care recipients. So caregivers tell us, you know what, James, the best thing you can do to support a caregiver is to support the person that they're providing care for. The second best thing you can do is to support the caregiver. We feel pretty strongly at CCCE that we can do both. We are a rich and generous and sophisticated G7 country. We should be able to do both at once. So let's help recipients of care at the same time as helping caregivers, like, for example, starting with the forthcoming Canada Disability Benefit. Let's implement it. Let's make it more generous. Our suggestion is a minimum of $12,000 a year rather than the $200 a month, as is currently being projected by the federal government. And let's also make it easier to access with a broader definition of disability and with less paperwork to go along with it. And while we're at it, let's take a massive hammer to the disability tax credit. I avail myself of this every year. Many others do. If you talk to people who do this and who avail themselves of it, I should say, they'll tell you all manner of crazy stories about how silly and arcane and Kafkaesque it is to try to access the disability tax credit. Big hammer to it to make it better and easier to access.
That would
So
be
that's number
wonderful.
three, and long overdue. Our fourth bucket is around the care provider workforce, those PSWs, those direct support professionals, etc. Big one here is let's enact this long promised minimum wage for care providers of $25 an hour. Minimum wage, not a maximum wage, not a standard wage, but rather a minimum wage, and then you can negotiate over and above that if you'd like. This was a commitment made by the Liberal government during the COVID crisis, specifically targeted at PSWs. Our suggestion is let's do that, plus apply it to the rest of the care provider workforce to capture those people who work in the disability sector, for example, to make sure they can avail themselves of this as well. There's also an element here around the immigration pipeline, making it easier for care providers to come to Canada to practice their work, and also make it possible for people who want to come to Canada and be part of the Canadian family. If they're a care provider in their home country, let's recognize their skills and let's give them points commensurate with those skills, because care work is skilled work. It is not unskilled transient labor. It is highly technical, skilled work that needs to be recognized. And if we want more care providers to come to Canada, which we want and desperately need,
Yep.
we need to recognize those skills and get them here as quickly as possible. The last bucket of our work is around government simply recognizing that this is an issue. Let's legislate the strategy. Let's make sure that it's recognized at the various research institutions that government funds. And let's also take a big bite out of this problem of military and veteran caregivers. That's one population that is entirely within the purview of the federal government. Let's make it easier to be a military or veteran caregiver, make it easier to access your benefits and have, for example, your eligibility for provincial supports be standardized across the country. So if you get redeployed in the Navy, for example, from Halifax to Vancouver, that your benefits should travel with you rather than have to wait an indeterminate amount of time for the province to kick in. That's the short version. Happy to go deep on any of the above if you'd like, but
This
that's our
is
strategy in a nutshell.
amazing. Thank you for sharing all this good news. I feel like sometimes as government we do so much work and we don't communicate the awesomeness that's going on, the paperwork. I realize that, yeah, it all takes time. But it's so important for people to know what's out there and what can they access. So a rapidly aging population in Canada. And then along with that, 20% of caregivers are over 65 years old themselves. So how does this put a pressure and make the ask urgent for our government?
That's a great question and a timely question. We're recording today on the 26th of May. Later today, the House of Commons meets for the first time after the general election at the end of April. Tomorrow, His Majesty King Charles III will deliver the throne speech to guide the first session of Parliament. And then after that, we're off to the races as the newly re-elected Mark Carney government gets to work with their new cabinet to do what needs to be done around strengthening Canada vis-a-vis the threat from the United States and Donald Trump, and also other headwaters facing us from all over the planet. I'm glad you put that stat on the table around the aging population and what that means vis-a-vis politics, because that is an unignorable statistic. I'll throw one more at you. As I said earlier, one quarter of all Canadians is a caregiver today. Half of all Canadians will be a caregiver at some point in their lives. I spent a career in politics. I continue to spend a career around politics. These are unignorable numbers that if you want to get elected in Canada, eventually we will reach a point where you cannot ignore this issue any longer.
Yep.
Right? Because these numbers are enormous.
Mm-hmm.
We are starting to get there. I'm very confident we're starting to get there for a couple of reasons. Number one, we did a survey of caregivers across Canada, a statistically significant survey that we published the results in 2024, just last year. And in that, we heard loud and clear from 90% of caregivers that care issues are ranked number one, two, or three, pardon me, in where they park their vote. In other words, they're shoppers. They're looking for the party that best speaks to their issues as caregivers and will reward that party with their vote, which in a democracy is how you form government. So politicians have started to listen and are listening to care issues today in a way they weren't as recently as the last federal election. The concrete evidence I have to show that is that in this last election cycle that just ended about a month ago, we received commitments from all the major political parties represented in the House of Commons around caregiving issues. Of particular interest today, because of the results of the election, is the commitment we received from the federal Liberals as they were campaigning in their platform to develop the National Caregiving Strategy. This is a milestone moment. The federal government in 2024 in the budget said they were going to do it. I don't need to tell you and your listeners how chaotic the last year of the government was. Not much got done. Parliament was stymied and so on. We had a leadership change. We had an election. Parliament is now meeting, like I said, and we have in our back pocket a clear commitment from the new government to develop that national caregiving strategy. So our hope is that government will pick up this document and say, hey, we've got a strategy ready to go. Let's just start implementing this one that is the product of the voices of tens of thousands of caregivers from across the country. So, my ask to your listeners is if you are part of this, pick up the phone, call your MP, ask for a meeting, write an email, write a letter, go on our website and participate in our Act on Care campaign that makes it very easy. You just have to put in your name and your postal code, and it'll generate an email automatically to the key players in the sector within the government, the Prime Minister, the ministers responsible, and your local MP. All to put pressure on them to say it's time to act on care, it's time to take these issues seriously. Eventually, these demographics will only get even more pressing on government,
Yep.
so the time to act is today.
Um, I'm going to ask you a question which is kind of a little tough. Um, there's always a cultural context to healthcare. Um, and in many Asian cultures, asking for help from government for something that should be your responsibility, taking care of seniors at your home or somebody vulnerable who needs help or cannot support themselves. You don't go out and ask for help from government. It's your duty. And then the language gap becomes another hurdle for lots of us. Uh, how would you advise, or what would you suggest to my listeners who are uncomfortable looking for resources, but they're struggling themselves, taking a hit on their finances or health, mental health? It's not easy to be a caregiver and figure out your finances alone and do what needs to be done for your loved one and for yourself and your families. So, what would you suggest to people who are just uncomfortable culturally or just don't know where to go and ask for help?
So I'll start by saying that I come from a community that's quite similar in that regard. I'm the children of Portuguese immigrants. My whole family was born in Portugal. I'm the first generation born in Canada. And there's a similar dynamic in the Portuguese community around leave it to family, right? It is your family duty to support your elder or to support people in your family or in your community who need help. Don't ask for help from government. We should do this. You should be able to do this yourself, particularly that language piece. So I've been a caregiver all my life, starting with great grandparents and grandparents. My great grandparents are long gone. I'm very close to my last remaining grandparent, my grandmother, with whom I'm quite close. I'll be seeing her later today, actually. And one of the roles that I've played, quite literally, Geetika, my entire life that I can remember, is to be that translator. Okay, I remember still to this day, I'm 38 years old, but I remember what 37 years old. Don't want to throw myself an extra year. But I remember as a kid, like 7, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, going to doctor's appointments with my grandparents and being the translator for them,
Oh.
right? Or the pharmacy, or the lawyer, or the this, the that, and the other, because that's what you do for your loved ones, right? And that's part of the immigrant experience. Is the kids are the ones who have an easier time learning the language, getting to know the culture, and then they have a responsibility to their elders to make things easier for them. So my advice to my community, then I would echo that you should share with your community is as you need to ask for help. I get the sentiment around trying to do it all yourself. It is a noble sentiment, but an impossible sentiment because society and the economy in Canada today is structured in such a way that everybody needs to work. Everybody needs to work hard. Everybody needs to work hard to make a living, to put food on the table, to pay the rent, to pay the mortgage. And it is impossible to work at the level that you need to survive and do well in Canada without asking for some help with your care responsibilities that many of us shoulder. So I say, like, take that step. Okay, maybe start within the community. So I look often to SAC, the South Asian Autism Center, for example, here in Toronto and Scarborough. They are leaders within your community around bringing services to the community and opening the doors wide. My community has similar organizations like Luso Charities, for example, and the forthcoming Magellan House, whose job it is to create culturally competent services for people who need help. Because that's another part of this. It is much more likely that people will ask for help if they know that what they're getting is responsive of their unique needs. Sometimes, often, it's language, but it's not just language. If you're talking about senior care, it's food. It's culture. It's making sure, again, speaking for my community, it's making sure that the kids' dance troops that I used to do as a kid show up at the retirement homes and talk to the seniors and be part of their community. So it's a long-winded way of saying I get the concern, I get the hesitation, but you need to ask. You need to take that extra step and maybe start by taking that step within your own community.
Thank you. Before we wrap up the interview, I want you to repeat the website that people can go to. And you said pick up the phone and call your local MP. So tell me the address of that website one more time. And did I
Sure.
miss on anything else?
So everybody, please go to canadiancaregiving.org and you'll find everything I've talked about there. You'll find our National Caregiving Strategy, the full document, as well as a shorter version that distills it down to its key points. But you'll also find our Act on Care
Yeah.
campaign. It's right on the website. Just click on the button. Very easy. It's just happening for a few months now. So get on there quick, folks. Name, postal code, email, hit send, and it'll automatically generate these messages to our leaders on this. So, in addition to that, just go online, call up your MP, your MPP here in Ontario, ask for a meeting, and talk to them about these issues. If you want some guidance on that as well, we've published on our website some key questions and background information you can use to help you with that conversation with your elected officials.
Thank you so much, James. That was a lot of information. I hope people will benefit from it. Thank you for your time and keep doing the awesome work.
Thank you, Geetika. Thanks for the opportunity.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.